The devastating consequences of absent masculine figures. Now, in this short lecture, we'll go over the following: the consequences of men and fathers being marginalized, ideological subversion, the threat of big brother government, and the lies of feminism, and most importantly, what can we do about it? I should preface this by saying that I want to encourage discussion and critical thinking more than anything with this work. I'm fully aware that this is going to trigger some people, and that is okay. With that being said, I want to share a quote. Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. Now, this is a quote from Michael Hopf, and this actually represents an 8-year cycle. Each line of this poem represents a 20-year cycle in human civilization if you look at history. Indeed, we are living in very strange times. What has traditionally been the pillar of a strong society, masculine men and fathers in particular, appears nowhere to be found today. Instead, we have this. Now, to some people, this is progress. I don't know about you, but it doesn't feel that way to me. Are fathers necessary? Men, who needs them? What do we need men for? These are statements that are flowing freely into the media and the mainstream right now. Even in the recent G7 meeting, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said, we must build back better in a more gender neutral, more feminine way. Now, this may seem rather innocent, right? Healthy masculinity, it seems, is no longer deemed necessary. However, once we look through this white noise and propaganda and we begin to peel back the layers of the onion, we can see the shattering consequences of missing fathers all around us. And it's literally tearing apart the very nature of our society. Here are some stats I pulled out regarding fatherless homes. I'm not going to go over those, but it's safe to say that this fatherlessness and missing masculine authority figures is damaging the youth and future generations, to the point where it's really causing a fatherless pandemic. And our boys and girls are suffering the most. Which brings me to a quote: a child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. I think this is a metaphor for what is beginning, most likely will begin to happen in the next few years. So what is the role of the father, you may ask? Well, a father acts both as a role model as well as an authority figure, meant to reaffirm good boundaries, encourage constructive behavior, and curb bad behavior. We can see the consequences of absent male figures and mature masculine energy even in nature. The story is told by author and spiritual writer Richard Rohr. He goes on to describe a story about young male elephants in Africa that were out of control for seemingly no apparent reason, stomping on cars, attacking one another, destroying their environment. Scientists were baffled by this and were scratching their heads trying to figure out what is actually going on, until the penny dropped. Well, all the elder elephants were poached or killed for their tusks. Hence, a natural cycle or a balance has been disrupted. Without these masculine role models, the teenage elephants did not know how to act like mature males because they had never seen one. Long story short, what ended up happening was the scientists influenced some mature male elephants from a different part of Africa, and this solved the problem. The older bull males taught the younger ones how to act. So as you can see, this isn't just a phenomena with humans. However, how did we get here in the first place? We need to dive deeper to understand the roots of what caused this shift in our society by looking at history. Enter Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov, a former KGB informant who became a defector, went to Canada and started exposing the propaganda that was happening in the US at the time. By the way, this isn't new information. These interviews with Yuri Bezmenov have been recorded back in 1983 and 1984. The process of what he described as ideological subversion has been happening for a long time. And it has just been accelerated and made more obvious due to the advancement in technology and, of course, the internet. Ideological subversion, as Bezmenov named it, is an aggressive, destructive, yet overt activity aimed at destroying the country, nation, or geographical area of your enemy. no romantics here. Think about the Cold War at the time between the USSR and the United States. The idea is to change the perception of reality to such an extent that no one is able to come to a sensible conclusion in the interest of defending themselves, their family, or their country. Truth is being eroded, the logos is being ripped apart, and it's basically a brainwashing process at a massive scale. Part of these activities are aimed at destroying religion, family, political, and economical systems, as I will describe in just a second. Most of these activities, however, are overt, legitimate, and easily observable if you give yourself enough time. According to the law, it's simply not a crime. Now, there are 4 parts of this ideological subversion process. Number 1 being demoralization. It takes around 15 to 20 years to demoralize a society. How, you may ask? Well, by pouring propaganda into the soft heads of students for at least 2 to 3 generations and expose the ideology of your enemy to them, namely Marxism and communism. Think about, again, the USSR and the USA. Fast forward to today, the rise of wokeness, social justice, cancel culture, political correctness have been exacerbated, especially in the last 18 months or so. For this to work, you need to influence various areas where public opinion is shaped. Number 1, religion. Destroy it, replace it with cults in order to erode it. When religion is destroyed, you advertently destroy authority. God is being the ultimate father. Education. Start teaching social and gender sciences, basically nothing constructive. Think about critical race theory. Social life. Replace institutions with fake institutions, take away personal responsibility from people, and glorify victimhood. Sounds familiar? Power structures, traditionally elected by people or appointed by elected leaders. Media is a good example of how powerful it has become, yet nobody elected it. And of course, labor relations, classical Marxist and communist theory in exchange of goods. Normally, instead of having 2 people coming together and exchanging goods and bargaining, now you need a central planner in between them to do all of that for them. And of course, the destruction of the family. Now, there are 3 other phases of this process, but this is beyond the scope of the presentation. However, because this rabbit hole goes quite deep, you can look up cultural Marxism, and especially these 2 gentlemen here, Georgi Lucas and Antonio Gramsci, who are the founders of cultural Marxism and Frankfurt School. This will give you a lot more context of how we got where we are today. However, where does this lead to? Ultimately, destabilization of the economy, eliminating the principles of free market, competition, and putting a big brother government to rule them all. Now, looking at what has happened over the last 18 months, it's somewhat of a strange coincidence. However, as the old saying goes, never let a good crisis to waste. The last year, we've seen major economical, social, and political changes take place. Disguised as temporary measures, governments around the globe have progressively taken more and more power over its citizens, whilst eroding personal freedoms and liberties disguised as for your own protection. There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government measure. Can't remember who said that. However, again, we need to look at history to see this is nothing new. Let's look at the Patriot Act. After the 9/11, the President George Bush Jr. introduced a very controversial bill called the Patriot Act. Very fancy name for something that has nothing patriotic about it. As a result, again, civil rights were being watered down, monitoring your every move you make online, and the masses, of course, have accepted that. And this is what is called social harvesting. Today, it seems that you can't even sneeze without asking permission from big brother government. I'm sure that many of us would have laughed out loud if someone was to say to them, even just, 18 months ago, you weren't going to be allowed to go outside. You wouldn't be able to even see your own family. You aren't going to be allowed to see your friends in your own house. You have to wear a mask everywhere you go, and you have to show your papers if you want to get on a plane. Now, to me, there's a lot of resemblance already. Even a recent example from a friend of mine in Denmark who wanted to go and visit his neighbor. But for that, he needs to take a test. Now, when he got the test, he was asked, are you okay with us sharing your results with the government? So my friend said, no, heck no. He was then told he could not get tested if he didn't. Therefore, he is no longer allowed to visit his neighbor without the government permission and getting updates on his status. Now, you may be asking, or you may be telling me, Pav, you've been watching a lot of sci-fi recently, and it may be true, but we don't need to look further into China to see what is actually happening and the potential future that's lurking around the corner. Social credit scores, people being stuck, unable to travel, and that every move is being tracked by the government. Now, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is rolling out their digital yuan so that every purchase you make is being monitored and everything can be taxed or banned instantly. This is quite scary. To me, the quote, "If men are weak, there is no defense against tyranny," rings quite true, especially in the current state of affairs. Now, a strong society of men would never allow this to happen or to go as far. This is why masculinity, I believe, is under attack. Now, what happened with all the men? Well, they're distracted. Pornography, alcohol, video games, work, drugs. I can go on and on with addictions. And as a result, what has been happening, of course, testosterone is going down. And whenever you don't have testosterone, then what happens with men? They become docile. They become weak. In his book, Hard Times Create Strong Men, the late Stefan Arniel writes, "Since the 1950s, men have been losing power in the Western world. The opposite is true for women, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. However, we have now reached a point of largely marginalizing the father due to misguided radical feminism, which is based on self-hate. Basically, hate the feminine and idealize masculine values in women. Women taking the masculine role of work. Welfare state, divorce, child and sex laws. TV sitcoms depicting dads as some inadequate, good-for-nothing dummy." Remember this guy? To destroy a society or a group of people, simply remove the men. This has been a successful strategy throughout history and wars. Kill the men, rape the women, enslave the children. Patriarchy has become the enemy, and there is a witch hunt to dismantle it. Our society, it seems, is like a 15-year-old kid playing the victim and blaming the father for all the bad things that have ever happened. Now, don't get me wrong, patriarchy has done a lot of bad things. Predominantly, I believe, because it was under the influence of immature boys pretending to be men most of the time. So we haven't really seen a real patriarchy. However, woke culture and the rise of it, entitlement, lack of personal responsibility is eroding the minds of men and women, but especially the young. We now leave everything to the state. There's been this kind of stretching out of hierarchies between an individual and the state. So the intermediary that normally sits in the middle has been destroyed, especially the family, local communities, and civil society. State-owned daycare, healthcare, state-owned schools. The state and big government now serve as the figurative father for this new perverted system. The welfare system favors women over men. The welfare system has replaced the need for men as a provider. Think about all the money that was printed in the last 18 months, not just in the US, but globally. Stimmy checks and universal basic income probably is going to follow suit soon. The nuclear family with the father, mother, and the kids are the basic atom of a society. But when the authority of men is subverted and they're removed from the household, you end up with a perverted society. This notion of elimination of fathers, weak men, masculinity, and moral standards from the family is very, very dangerous. Another part of my research led me to the rise of collectivism, predominantly driven by globalists. This is a set of ideologies or ideas in which the goal of a certain collective, state, nation, or a society are given precedence over the goals of individuals. Socialism, communism, fascism are all collective ideologies. Phrases like "we're in this together," "build back better for the greater good," have occupied the mainstream and are being hammered continuously from the media and government. Now, the lies of feminism. Again, come to my common sense corner for a second. I should preface this by saying that I'm not encouraging people to be victims, let alone blame women for what is happening. However, modern feminism is a direct outgrowth and a child of communism. The objective of communism is to destroy the father and substitute it with a different father, i.e. the government. Feminism at its most basic level is about rebellion against the family and family values. Feminists believe that a woman loses her identity once she is married. And again, I want to emphasize, I don't believe that most women have actually any interest whatsoever in Marxist ideologies or philosophies. Most women have simply been enticed by a movement that's disguised as women's empowerment, this kind of double speak. And again, here are some other quotes from very prominent feminists. Initially, I was looking at this thinking to myself, wait a minute, like what? Like I thought giving rights to women is a good thing, and I still wholeheartedly believe this to this day. But I was shocked to realize what feminism is actually about. Now, writer Warren Farrell, who by the way was a feminist and a very fierce one back in the 70s and 80s, then turned men's rights activist, writes, feminism grew from two huge iterations, predominantly civil rights movement and Marxism, this notion that you have to have an oppressor and oppressed. Think about the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Men, as part of their biological and social responsibility to be the breadwinner and to do the providing, but of course, when they do come home, and what do they want to do? The natural inclination is to go and spend time with the children. Therefore, if men earn most of the money, which they did back in the 80s, feminists would see that as a personification of the bourgeoisie. So therefore, women have to be the oppressed, i.e. the proletariat. Men as oppressors wanting to be equally involved with the children, whereas women are so focused on their freedoms because of the civil rights movement at the time. Therefore, they began to see the men as the oppressors. Oh, they're earning a lot more, but they also want to be with the children. Now, when you put those two together, then you end up in a situation where we are today. Jordan Peterson actually said in an interview, freedom with women can be seen as an irresponsibility. Freedom without the concern for the medium to long-term consequences of your actions when dealing with children is not freedom, but irresponsibility. Well, why is this important, you may ask? Well, to have a society, we need strong families. To have strong families, we need both parents. All the research points to the fact, regardless of what or how people feel about this. Now, because we're short for time, what can we as men do about all of this? Well, I want to leave you with three things. Namely, personal responsibility being the first and probably the most important one. Taking personal responsibility and leading by example. Why do you think Jordan Peterson has become so popular and literally a father figure to an entire generation of men? That's hashtag personal responsibility. His message of personal responsibility goes beyond conscious comprehension and into the depths of the unconscious, where it hits a certain archetype for young men. Why is this important, you may ask? Well, taking personal responsibility for where you are now in your life, regardless of what has happened, is crucial. This way you gain control over your life and you can act from a point of power. Instead of being on the sidelines as a spectator in your own life. Imagine how sad that must be. That includes no blaming and excessive complaining, refusing to be a victim in a society which celebrates this. That's an achievement in and of itself. As simple as this may sound, this is probably the toughest one to do out of all of the recommendations I'm going to give here. If you do choose to go down this route, I commend you for it. Expect things to be quite rough and uncomfortable, though. You will most definitely have to battle your inner demons and shadows, which is always challenging, but know that this is the right path. Number two, education. A world needs strong and educated men now more than ever. Think about it. No one has ever told me, oh yeah, I like weak men. Think about it. Women would never say that. When I say education, I certainly don't mean the mainstream media nor higher education. Great sources for education are books. There's plenty out there and they're available. There's some great podcasts and of course, alternative media outlets. And there are some great influencers on YouTube who really paint the picture of what it is what is really going on. And not surprisingly, they've gained a huge momentum in recent years. More than anything, be willing to be curious and have an open mind. After all, everyone can be wrong, but listening to an opposing viewpoint and having a debate on a topic is what really helps us learn better instead of censoring it. What is cultural Marxism? We need to educate ourselves on these topics. Socialism, communism, become a student of history and you'll start to see all the patterns repeating itself. Continuous education around preserving traditional values, particularly the family and gender roles, and why this is so important for a functioning society. And finally, spend time amongst other men. There is an immense power in being around other men. You can mentor other men and provide them that which maybe no one provided you when you were young. Help them fill that void. You can mentor other men. I lead a men's circle here at Maniphesto where we get together once a week to support each other in stepping up and taking responsibility. And with that, I want to leave you. Let me know what you guys think. If you like the content, let me know. If you didn't like it, it's okay. Just tell me why. Thank you very much.